Well, thank you very much for having me, and great to meet everybody that's on the line now. I figured before I get into the meat of the presentation, I should just give you a little bit of background on myself. So I'm a two-time founder. My first business was based in Boston, and it was a vertical SaaS company targeting a telecom space. My second company, and that was kind of back in the 2000 era. And then this one, I started in 2017. Another vertical SaaS business targeting the chemicals industry based in San Francisco. And really what I've noticed is that there are some really distinct characteristics for vertical SaaS businesses. And then there's also some characteristics that seem to kind of rear their heads as you go from 0 to $1 million in ARR to 5 to 10 to 20. And so this presentation just shares some of those insights. So first, let's just talk about account-based marketing and account-based sales in general. My perception over time is that it's kind of like come back into vogue, which is interesting. Everything that was old kind of becomes new again. There are some real kind of existential questions that startup founders need to ask themselves about whether or not ABM, ABS actually makes sense for their business. And we'll talk through those, look at it in practice, and then talk about some gotchas. So, what's all the hype about? There's great data from all sorts of different industry pundits and industry analysts on the effectiveness of account-based marketing and account-based sales. Obviously, everyone's trying to build pipeline to be able to increase your opportunities based on being more tailored is highly, highly valuable. Obviously, everyone wants to increase deal size. I think, you have a certain amount of budget and you have a certain CAC level based on the different marketing levers that you're pulling. And certainly, everyone is mindful of, what's really yielding ROI and, how much of it. So obviously getting, more effectiveness is better than less. And then I think there's also some really interesting data on just, the companies that seem to be growing the fastest are often using account-based marketing and account-based sales approaches in their go-to-market. I think kind of conversely, there's also a lot of hype around product-led growth. That's not really the focus of this presentation, but I do have some kind of examples of a continuum with product-led growth on the one hand and, ABM, ABS kind of on the other end of a continuum. So the reality for most startups, and I think this is something that a lot of startup founders don't 100% think through at the very beginning, is that your market and your product really determine your optimal go-to-market strategy and approach. Judy Lohr, someone that I really respect highly, she was one of the original employees at Salesforce, like one of their first product managers, first person to run marketing there. She ultimately went on to be kind of acting initial CMO at ServiceMax and Conga and Zora. So, really someone who's been in SaaS from the beginning of SaaS, and really kind of an amazing marketer, I would say, in the space. And I think a lot of people don't realize that it's not like, oh, I'm just going to do product-led growth, but I'm really like an enterprise software company. It's very hard to do that. You need to really ask yourself, okay, who are we selling to? Do I have an ideal customer profile, or is it really an ideal account profile? And account would be a little bit more leaning towards account-based marketing and sales. How many companies are out there? Is it a highly concentrated market like pharma, where there's 400, 500 whales, and then there's a long tail of biotech companies, or is it much more diversified and a kind of larger set of companies that you can go after? How big are these companies? That impacts things. Is this, an enterprise sale, or is this really, going after small and medium businesses, et cetera? And then on the product side, how easy is your product to use? I mean, I think everyone thinks of Slack as the kind of the quintessential kind of product-led growth company, something that anyone can kind of sign up for. Asana is probably another great example, or is it something that's industrial strength that you really need to sell to multiple function heads to get an organization to buy, and you have to go top down. And, by definition, your sales cycles are going to be longer because you're not trying to convince an individual to just put in their name and email. You're trying to get a whole company to buy. And then you have to do things like integration, customization, and, obviously, at the end of the day, what's the price point? Is it free, and therefore you're in that kind of freemium space, or is this something that's costing $100,000 or $1 million a year, that's really a tremendously considered purchase in an organization. So then, once you answer those questions, you really see, okay, based on, market and product, where do I fall? Is this something that's freemium that can, be potentially useful to anyone on the planet? And I can really kind of go bottoms up with a product-led growth strategy on the one hand, all the way to the left. Is it horizontal SaaS? And I think Salesforce is probably the best example of, classic horizontal SaaS business where, they could sell their CRM to any company, small or large. And they've got a full spectrum of marketing activities that they deploy to get, businesses of every size on board. Is it enterprise SaaS where all of a sudden, okay, now these are really, really big ticket items and, I'm not selling to, hundreds of millions of companies on a global basis. And, I am going to deploy more account-based approaches. Oftentimes for enterprise SaaS businesses, you're even more narrow. You're actually at the account level. So you've named account direct Salesforce strategy. And then vertical SaaS, where you're really focused on an industry. Everything about your product is geared for the workflows that you're automating in that specific industry. There's a known universe of prospects. Often you can buy, lists of the superset of companies in your space. Typically when you're in one industry, there's a lot of word of mouth and you can definitely leverage that in your marketing. I heard a great story that, for the first few years of Viva's life, they basically did, customer case study based marketing, and if you're vertical SaaS, you are definitely going top down and you're deploying, all sorts of account-based marketing and account-based sales strategies to identify the accounts, identify the right people within those accounts, and actually, get leads and ultimately opportunities. The other thing I would say on vertical SaaS is that it really requires, specific strategies and tactics that are different from, the other categories of businesses that were on the last page. So again, you're going to target companies that have very similar characteristics. It's very research driven, and a lot of the work that needs to get done from marketing and sales standpoint is very front loaded, meaning the marketing team is working really hard to understand, what are the key marketing messages, to whom, how do you get maybe even, third-party indications of, a company's potential interest in buying what it is that you have to sell, or a company's problem level, is the problem level really high, and therefore, you coming in with a solution is going to be very well received. There's a lot of work that happens up front. It can be named account, especially if the price point is very high for what you have to offer. And often you can tailor sales and marketing by geo or kind of sub-segment specific go-to-market. The product roadmap, also vertical specific, just like I said on the last slide. And you're thinking about your product. Okay, I need to get it out. I know that I'm going to have second and third, fourth products to increase the ticket, if you will. So I'm going to start at a certain ACV level, and then as I add these other products or I add these other groups, I can generate incremental ACV over time. Obviously, it's a lot easier to expand than to land a net new account. So you want to be able to do both the land and the expand. Pricing and packaging is also very specific. You're pricing for the land, but you need to really reevaluate the pricing on a regular basis and, make sure that how you're pricing it is really aligned with the value that you're creating. And then make sure that, whatever you've got on your rate card is consistent with how you're quoting and consistent with the legal. And again, like intentional levers for expansion. In vertical SaaS, you have tremendous opportunity to expand. And it's really important that you're doing both the land and then the expand. And certainly VCs are going to look at you and look at your success rates, in both of those areas. And then customer success. I mean, again, because everyone knows one another in the industry, they're all 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from each other. You really need to make sure that you're over-indexing on customer success because you need those references, you need those co-marketing opportunities, you need those customer case studies. And then this is a numerical example. So, really what you're kind of doing is, typical sales funnel like this, where you got, all of your your leads at the very top, and then you're kind of moving folks through the funnel and getting to, the ARR that pops out at the bottom. But I thought this is a great way to think about it, is like, if you invert that, I've got a bookings target, and I've got average deal size, how many sales qualified opportunities do I even need to have in order to have any sort of chance of hitting my bookings target? Same thing on the SQLs. If I know that I'm converting at a certain rate, how many SQLs do I need to have in order to be able to back into SQOs? And then you go all the way down to the bottom. So, the reality is that the account pool needs to be significantly larger when you're in a horizontal sector, and you're not doing that much research to really qualify these up front. There's some basic things that you're doing. By contrast, in vertical, it's highly, highly researched. It's very, very tailored. You need a lot fewer in the account pool to kind of back yourself into your bookings target. And I just find that for a lot of founders, it's really important to be able to see what your numbers are and to be tracking these things, because without, some sort of framework to analyze what you're doing, you don't know where you're falling down or what you could actually be improving. Is it that we're not doing good enough research? Is it that the messages aren't resonating? Is it that, we don't have enough shots on goal? We're not making enough phone calls. We're not sending enough emails. Like, what's really happening as you kind of, back your way into all the various activities that you need to do to achieve your bookings target. And I think this is just an interesting way to think about kind of what is that motion for account-based marketing and sales. Again, a lot of this is happening before a salesperson is actually involved. And I think that's what's the critical thing to realize. You really need to have a strong marketing lead and, marketing process in order for this to really yield the results that you want. So there's an art and a science to defining the accounts. Who are you really going after? With what criteria? Is it just, monetary in terms of how much revenue these companies are generating? Is it the number of people? Is it the product categories that they're in? Is there something, unique about kind of various elements of their business that you can do research on and then say, okay, these accounts are going to be in my account pool. Obviously you have to go out and find them, which are these companies, where are their names, where are their headquarters. You're doing all sorts of research because you want to make sure the messaging is as tailored and targeted as possible to the account. So again, you're only selling in one industry. So it's not like, saying something about the industry is going to work. That's relatively generic. At this point, you need to come in with messages that are specific to the account. Then obviously you want to figure out who within the account you actually should be talking to. That's high enough to be able to kind of rally their colleagues around getting to a purchase. And so, usually there's 5, 10, maybe even more, individuals at an account that you'd be reaching out to, and you're trying to figure out, okay, who's really the key decision maker here, who's going to lead it from their end, recognizing that, again, it's a multi-party, multi-function, buy process on their side. At the same time that all this is going on, your marketing team, and again, you'll notice that a lot of this is coming from marketing going to seed the targets. So we know these companies' names, we know where they're headquartered, we know the specific individuals at these target accounts that we want to reach out to. What kind of programs can we put together to actually kind of grease the wheel, if you will? So is it, geofencing around headquarters? Is it, LinkedIn to specific individuals or at the company level? What are all the different levers that you can pull as a marketer to raise awareness of your company and the solution that you have, either the problems that you're solving or the solution that you have to those specific problems, so that once you do start the prospect process, it's not cold. They have some notion of, who you are, what you do, and, why they should be talking to you. So, of this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 of these are truly marketing. And then you kind of have your SDRs focusing on prospecting and really reaching out and reiterating the messaging that, marketing's kind of brought to the table. to book meetings. And then ultimately you get the salesperson involved, and, your AE team will, take the meetings that are set up by the SDRs. Obviously, you're going to have some qualification process. So, how do you get from a sales qualified lead to a sales qualified opportunity? And that's really the difference between being in the prospect bucket and being in the sell bucket. And then, ideally you're getting to a close. And, what you see with the data at the very beginning of this presentation is that if you do all of this, research and homework up front, and you have a really strong kind of marketing muscle and set of marketing processes, then what can happen is that your conversion rates on going from SQLs to SQOs can be higher, and from SQOs to actual, booked revenue. And that's what you're ultimately trying to do. And again, the reality is that if you're, a freemium product, you don't need to do any of this. It's really more law of large numbers. You're going to take a completely different approach as it relates to, your whole go-to-market process. But, if you're in vertical SaaS, for instance, this is kind of a tried and true way to approach this. The other thing that I always like to talk about and to analyze on a regular basis is the sales velocity equation. So, at what interval am I generating what amount of revenue? So obviously this is a function of, how many deals are in the pipeline at any given point in time. What's the average selling price, or, kind of annual contract value of the recurring portion of your contracts, the close rate, and divided by the time and days it takes you to get from the beginning to the end of your pipeline process. And, looking at your data this way is really helpful, because you can see, okay, well, maybe my issue is it's not close rate. I have a really high close rate. We're closing 60%, but for whatever reasons, it's too hard. We're getting too few number of deals in. We don't have enough shots on goal. So even though our close rate is really high, I need to focus on, marketing and maybe SDR activity to increase the number of deals that are, in the consideration set. Conversely, if the close rate is really low, it could be that you have too many deals. You're not actually doing the proper marketing and qualification up front in the process, and you have a lot of noise in your pipeline, and you need to get rid of that noise. The pipeline's probably overinflated in terms of the overall value of the pipeline, and you need to do work at the beginning of the process so that you can actually achieve a higher close rate, and ideally a faster close rate as well. A lot of these factors are interrelated, but if you together use both the kind of numerical example of, okay, what's really happening in terms of my account pool, my sales qualified leads, my sales qualified opportunities, and my net, the resulting bookings, and you also look at your sales velocity, then together you have a really good picture of the effectiveness of, the sum total of your go-to-market motions. And that's really the position that you want to be in, so that you can optimize where it makes sense to optimize, so that you're really focusing your time and resources on activities that are going to yield ROI. There's a few gotchas, and what I would say is that, on the internet, on social media, we see so much about product-led growth, and obviously a better product is better than a worse product, and an easier to deploy and sign up product is better than one that's harder. But the reality is that, if you're really selling vertical SaaS, or you're selling, enterprise software, a lot of those strategies just really aren't going to apply. Across the board, CAC is going up. So it doesn't matter what kind of business you have. The general trend is that it's just getting more expensive to acquire a customer. So I do think there's some very specific things that you can do in vertical SaaS to address that. Are you focused on the right target accounts? Are you really qualifying your leads? Have you done the analysis of your sales velocity equation to figure out where your problem is? Once you do those things, then you can actually, focus your resources accordingly. And in theory, then you should be able to drive your CAC down as your metrics improve. There's a lot of data on the fact that buyers like to self-educate. Often in both vertical SaaS and enterprise software sales, you're really pushing into the market. It's not so much pull from the individual as push, to the buyer. And I think that, everyone that's selling, high ticket software needs to just accept that this is the case. We need to have great content that's out there that potential buyers can pull. We need a variety of content types with no walls so that they can get it really easily. I think there's a huge opportunity also to retarget, to try to create some flywheel effects between, them self-educating, you marketing, and then ultimately, you selling. And then try before you buy. And I think, for all the software companies that are out there that are, have a freemium product that, lots of people can sign up for and use, I think that's changed also the expectation on, no one really wants to buy something that they haven't seen, that they haven't touched, they haven't kicked the tires. There are a lot of things that we can do to give people access to the product, even if it's not deployed across their organization. And so whether that's product videos or sharing release notes, product collateral, certainly there's information that you can share. And then I think also, a lot of companies offer sandbox programs, free pilots, paid pilots. And I think, most software companies need to be prepared to do something that lets people kick the tires before they've actually made a purchase. So I guess in summary, because we're nearing the end of this session, and I'm certainly happy to field questions. Vertical SaaS is different. It's a different product. It's a different market. It really requires its own go-to-market sales motion. ABM, ABS, I think, is extraordinarily well suited to address the market and to address kind of unique product characteristics. And so for anyone that's in a vertical SaaS business, definitely think that something that you guys should be seriously considering. And so with that, I wanted to see if there were any questions.
Thank you. If folks can submit any questions in the chat, we'll be able to field those through the chat function. So one question that came in was, and you touched on this a little earlier in the session, but what are some of the, related to, for example, CAC going up, what are some of the common mistakes that both entrepreneurs as well as sales and marketing teams what are some of the common mistakes that they can make in trying to address increasing CAC issues?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes marketing programs are just set up to run, and that's okay. But I think, like with all things, you have to really be on top of the metrics. And I think CAC can go up for a variety of different reasons. It could be that you're targeting a subsegment that's just not ready to purchase yet for whatever reason, or you have some sort of existential issue going on, like a pandemic is happening, or there could be lots of different reasons why it's taking longer and it's more expensive to get people to buy. And so the only way to really address that is to concretely be able to understand why, like what is really happening here. Is it that, just like the classic example, is it that we're not qualifying the leads properly? That's going to drive your CAC up, because now all of a sudden your salespeople who are, highly compensated are spending a lot of time, chasing leads that aren't going to convert. There's just too much noise there. So that is something, but the only way that you're going to know that that's the case is to really analyze the data. And I think, a lot of folks just aren't set up to be tracking everything at the level of kind of granular detail that they need to, so that they can figure out what's really happening. I don't know if that's answered your question. I mean, but I just think it's always analysis driven. I mean, you have to know, why is it going up? Is it that it's taking longer? Is it that, all of a sudden, like, all the keywords I bought are more expensive? Is it, are we just getting shut out of deals, or are we losing at the end? Are we getting all the way to a paid pilot and we lose against our biggest competitor? What's really happening in the sales process? And you have to be so honest with yourself and kind of humble to really, look at everything and be honest about, what's driving the increase in CAC.
One other question that came in through the chat was, what in your opinion is the best strategy to gather info on prospects?
Okay, so it really depends on the level of targeting that you need to do because of the count of companies in your space. So, I think I used the example of pharma, 400 whales. I'm in a space, chemicals, 18,000 chemical companies. I mean, some spaces have hundreds of thousands of businesses. So, if you're in a situation where you've got hundreds of thousands or millions of potential prospects, you're not going to really be able to do a super, super granular level of detail. Obviously, if you're targeting public companies, all of their S1s and, their quarterly reporting data is public information. There's certainly that. There's all their press releases. You can follow them on LinkedIn. I mean, there's all sorts of levels of research that you can do, but it's really going to be the amount of research that you can afford to do is going to be driven by how many companies there are in your vertical. So, obviously you can buy data from, third-party sources. Zoom Info's out there. There's all sorts of ways that you can get information, some of which are free and some of which are paid. And then the question is, when you're tracking the effectiveness of your outbound emails and messaging, as well as any activity from your SDRs, to really be able to associate those messaging and the amount of tailoring and targeting that you're doing to the effectiveness of, those various marketing levers. And that's why I'm saying, you really need to be set up to track and monitor everything, because otherwise you don't know. Maybe the messaging was off. Maybe I didn't do enough research. Maybe I spent too long tailoring things, and that incremental, hour on that email didn't move the needle at all. So if you don't have the data, it's very hard to know what's going on. And I think it's hard to trust your gut in these situations, especially if you have a lot of outbound activity and a lot of SDRs. You really need to see the data.